This story will hit you harder than you expect. It begins with a simple interaction, but ends with a powerful lesson everyone needs to hear. The restaurant went silent. Forks froze midair. Eyes widened. Every conversation, every laugh, every clinking glass came to a sudden stop. Because everyone had just heard the same thing. Loud, sharp, and dripping with arrogance. Are you stupid or something? The words sliced through the atmosphere like a knife. And they came from Richard Hale, the millionaire CEO with a reputation almost as expensive as the suits he wore. Richard was the kind of man who walked into a room expecting the world to adjust itself for him. Today, he was in town for one reason only: to finalize a massive $200 million partnership deal. The contract was supposed to elevate his tech empire to global domination. But in this moment, Richard cared nothing about the deal, the company, or his future. No. His attention was fixed on Maya, a young black waitress barely into her 20s, soft-spoken, hard-working, and known for keeping calm even on the busiest shifts. She had simply approached the table with her usual gentle smile. "Sir," she said politely, "the kitchen just needs 2 more minutes on your order. I wanted to keep you informed." But instead of appreciation, she received humiliation. Her fingers trembled around her notepad. She lowered her gaze, trying to steady her breathing, trying not to let the entire room see the crack forming inside her confidence. I apologize, sir," she whispered. "I didn't mean." Richard cut her off with a dismissive scoff, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "Some people are just slow," he sneered. "Guess it comes with the job." A few customers gasped. Others exchanged disturbed glances. A couple shook their heads in disgust. Maya's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She stood there, frozen, feeling small, exposed, and helpless, wishing she could disappear, wishing someone would speak up, wishing the ground would swallow her just to escape the humiliation. But what Richard didn't know, what his ego blinded him from seeing, was that someone extremely important had been watching the entire exchange. Someone who noticed Maya's professionalism, her politeness, her patience. Someone who observed Richard's cruelty, his entitlement, and his complete lack of respect. And that someone was about to change both of their lives forever. Sitting quietly in the back of the restaurant, almost invisible to everyone except the staff, was Elias Turner, a man whose quiet presence carried more power than Richard Hale's entire persona. Elias wasn't just any wealthy man. He was a billionaire investor, a builder of empires, a mentor to hundreds of entrepreneurs, and a fierce advocate for ethical leadership. He was the kind of man who didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to. His reputation did that for him. But Richard didn't recognize him. Richard never paid attention to people he didn't consider important. In his mind, a billionaire investor should look the part, loud, flashy, surrounded by bodyguards. But Elias was the opposite. Calm, observant, blending in with the everyday crowd as if he preferred it that way. Yet while Richard ignored the room, Elias saw everything. He saw the insult. He saw the arrogance. He saw the way Richard puffed up his chest, feeding his ego at the expense of someone innocent. And he saw Maya. He watched how her composure didn't completely break, even though anyone else might have collapsed under humiliation. She didn't argue. She didn't talk back. She didn't let her anger show. Instead, she simply continued doing her job with the same professionalism she had shown every other customer. That alone impressed Elias more than any business pitch ever could. A few minutes later, Maya approached his table with a steaming cup of tea. Even though her eyes were glossy with tears she was holding back, she still presented the drink with her gentle, practiced smile. "Here you are, sir," she said quietly. Elias looked up at her, not with pity, but with genuine respect. "You handled that with dignity," he said softly. Maya blinked, surprised. I tried." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Some people shout to feel powerful," he said. "But real strength doesn't need volume." Those words hit her deeper than she expected. For the first time since Richard's outburst, Maya felt seen, not as someone being belittled, but as someone worthy of respect. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling but sincere. But while Maya stepped away to continue her shift, Elias remained still, his expression shifting from compassion to calculation. He had already made up his mind. The $200 million deal Richard Hale was supposed to finalize today? The deal Richard had bragged about all week? The deal he believed was his guaranteed victory? It was about to take a very different turn. And Richard had no idea his downfall had just walked through the door dressed as kindness. Minutes later, the restaurant door swung open, and in walked Daniel Brooks, Richard's longtime business partner. He scanned the room with urgency, adjusting his tie as he searched for the man who held their company's future in his hands. His eyes finally landed on Elias Turner, sitting calmly in the back corner. Daniel's face lit up with relief. "Mr. Turner, I had no idea you arrived early," he said as he hurried over. "I'm so glad you're here. Richard will be joining us any moment. He's been looking forward to this meeting." But before Daniel could continue, Elias lifted a hand, quiet, controlled, and unmistakably firm. "Actually," Elias said evenly, "I'm already familiar with Richard." Daniel blinked. Confusion swept across his face. You two met already?" Elias nodded once, slowly. "In a way." Before Daniel could ask what that meant, Richard finally strutted toward them. His confidence returned now that he was stepping into business mode. He smoothed his jacket, flashed what he believed was a charming smile, and extended his hand dramatically. "Mr. Turner, pleasure to finally meet." Elias didn't move. He didn't rise. He didn't smile. He didn't even acknowledge the outstretched hand. Instead, he stared at Richard with a calm, unreadable expression, one that instantly made Richard's smile falter. Then Elias spoke, his voice low but carrying enough weight to silence the surrounding tables. "I just witnessed how you treated your waitress." Richard froze mid-gesture, hand still hanging awkwardly in the air. His eyes widened as he scrambled to piece together what Elias meant. Elias continued, his tone steady but sharp enough to slice through Richard's ego. "If that's how you speak to people who serve you, then I can only imagine how you treat your employees behind closed doors. And I don't invest in companies led by people who belittle others." The color drained from Richard's face. He stuttered instantly. "Wait, that was just a misunderstanding. She messed up my order and—" "She didn't," Elias replied bluntly. "I watched the whole thing." Richard swallowed hard. Elias leaned forward slightly. "But even if she had, respect is not optional." Daniel's expression collapsed. He knew what was coming. His shoulders sagged as panic settled in. This deal wasn't just important, it was their lifeline. "Mr. Turner," Daniel begged, "please, let's talk privately. Work this out." Elias stood up. "No," he said simply. "I've seen enough." Then came the blow that shattered the entire room. "I'm pulling the deal. All $200 million of it." Effective immediately, a hush spread through the restaurant, this time filled with shock, satisfaction, and justice. Richard's face turned ghostly pale. "Why, you can't do that," he sputtered desperately. Elias looked him dead in the eyes. "I can," he said calmly. "And I just did." The news spread through the restaurant like wildfire. Phones buzzed. Employees whispered urgently. Customers leaned over tables, sharing what they'd just witnessed. Within minutes, word began leaking to Richard's own team outside. Texts flew back and forth. Investors, partners, and board members started calling. Richard Hale, the man known for flawless public image, sharp business instincts, and a spotless professional record, had just lost a $200 million deal in front of a room full of strangers. His reputation, once polished and powerful, now cracked like thin glass under a hammer. And the cruel irony? The entire disaster started because Richard couldn't control his ego for 5 seconds. Meanwhile, Maya stood at the side of the room, her hands still shaking. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't smiling. She didn't even understand the full weight of what had just happened. All she knew was that she had been humiliated by one of the richest, most influential men in the city, and now everyone was staring. A tiny part of her feared she would somehow be blamed, fired, punished. But instead of anger, Daniel Brooks approached her. His face was tight with disappointment. Disappointment not toward her, but toward the man he had trusted for years. "I'm so sorry for what you went through," Daniel said, his voice soft and sincere. "You didn't deserve any of that. None of it." Maya nodded gently, surprised that someone had acknowledged her pain. But before she could respond, she noticed Richard walking toward her. Not confidently. No, that confidence had evaporated. He approached stiffly, jaw tight, eyes darting around the room. He wasn't coming because he wanted to apologize. He was coming because the entire restaurant was watching. Because every pair of eyes demanded accountability. He stopped in front of her, shoulders tense. Richard swallowed hard. His voice cracked with discomfort. I apologize for earlier. The words sounded foreign in his mouth, forced out like they were made of sandpaper. Maya looked up at him, really looked at him. She saw not power, not success, but a man who'd finally been forced to face the consequences of his behavior. I accept your apology, she said gently. Then she added the words that struck deeper than any financial loss ever could. But please remember, your words matter. People matter. It was simple. Honest. True. And for the first time that day, maybe the first time in years, Richard had absolutely nothing to say. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He simply stood there, hollow, as the weight of everything finally settled onto his shoulders. As Richard stormed out of the restaurant, his steps sharp, angry, and humiliated, the heavy glass door slammed behind him. The room exhaled, as if releasing the tension he had carried in with him. The moment he disappeared from sight, Elias Turner quietly stepped forward. He approached Maya with the same calm energy he had shown from the beginning. His presence alone seemed to soften the air. You know, Elias said thoughtfully, your kindness stayed steady even under pressure. That's leadership. Maya blinked, startled that someone as important as him would say something so meaningful to her. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, cheeks flushing. I'm just doing my job, she replied shyly. Elias smiled warmly. Exactly, and doing it with dignity. Most people wouldn't have handled that moment with the grace you did. Maya lowered her gaze, not from shame this time, but from disbelief. Compliments weren't rare for her, but being recognized for something so deeply personal by a man of such influence felt unreal. Then Elias straightened slightly, as if preparing to shift from observation to action. Maya, he said, his voice steady and sincere, I'd like to offer you a position. Her breath caught. A position? Yes, Elias continued. My foundation funds scholarships, leadership programs, and community development projects. If you're interested, I'd like to sponsor your education and offer you a part-time role in our outreach team while you study. For a moment, Maya simply stared, her mind unable to catch up with what she was hearing. Me? She whispered, her voice trembling. But why me? Elias's answer was simple, but powerful. Because you handled cruelty with grace, he said. Because you showed character when it was hardest to. And because the world needs more people who lead with compassion, not arrogance. Her eyes filled with tears, overflowing with emotion she couldn't contain. Around them, customers began applauding softly, genuine, supportive applause that wrapped around her like a warm embrace. Maya nodded, overwhelmed and breathless. Thank you. Thank you so much. Elias offered his hand, and she shook it carefully, as if afraid the moment might shatter. Kindness, he said gently, always pays off, sometimes sooner than you think. And as they walked toward the exit, one billionaire with quiet wisdom and one young woman whose life had just changed forever, the restaurant staff watched with proud smiles. That day, they witnessed something unforgettable. A millionaire lost a $200 million deal because of arrogance. But a waitress gained a life-changing opportunity because of her heart. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.